when I came up with the idea for Shazam, I thought, it's going to be, people are going to hold their phone up in the air, and then they're going to know the name of the song. And that just felt like magic. It really felt like magic.
It is still, I think.
Yeah, and it's like, wow, how can that be?
3, 2, 1.
The first person we're going to interview is a person you don't know the person, but I bet you've used the product. It's called Shazam. How many have Shazam on your phone? The man who created this product, when he came up with this product, it was impossible. Everyone said it was impossible. He came up with a product 3 years before iTunes, 7 years before we ever had an iPhone. I mean, literally before there was digital music, he thought of this idea of, wouldn't it be cool if you could wave your phone in the air, hear a song, and in 15 seconds, no matter where the song was playing, be able to know what that song is, access up that song, and be able to make that happen. And he did it. He did it in spite of every obstacle you can possibly imagine. And he ended up selling this business for $400 million to Apple. It's the fourth largest one. 1 billion people have downloaded this app. And today, if you have an iPhone, you can just say, Siri, what's this song? It's built into Siri as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand up, give a big hand to the co-founder of Shazam, Chris Barton. It's Chris, let him hear ya! Oh, yes. Chris, it's such a pleasure to meet you and a privilege to be with you. You've got a product that most of us around the world all are delighted by. I can probably remember the first time we ever used it. I certainly remember the first time I did. Driving a car, hearing a song while I'm driving, clicking on Shazam and going, oh my God, this song by Pink, Funhouse. This is really cool. And I use music in all my events. So I'm always hearing music, and I was always trying to gather, what is that? We call this, the radio stations and say, what was that song? And now to have this at our fingertips. I want to know, before we get into the journey of Shazam, I'd like to know a little bit about you. Tell us, what it was like growing up, and what do you think created this belief inside of you that says, I can do things people say are impossible?
Yeah, let's see. I think growing up, similar to my son, I have undiagnosed dyslexia and ADHD, and I had my own challenges of just kind of getting through basic academics. So you'd have to kind of cope and come up with your own coping strategies and find your own, define your own ways.
Now, you just blew my mind, because didn't you go to Cambridge, and didn't you get a degree? What was your degree in Cambridge?
That was a master's in finance.
In finance?
Yeah.
And you have dyslexia?
Yeah.
That's wild. Tell us how you managed it, how you made it.
I remember when I was an undergraduate at Berkeley, and I remember when I arrived, the first thing I did is I went and got the syllabus for each class, and I thought, okay, now which classes can I take that have the least reading involved? And so I just kept pivoting towards majors and focuses areas that had the least reading.
Wow.
Yeah, because it's such a challenge.
Wild. So you had this dyslexia. Did it make you more creative then, do you think?
Yes, so I teach my son this, and I've read about dyslexia and ADHD, and what's interesting about both of them is that while they make traditional academics a challenge and they make it hard to get good grades, so people like Charles Schwab and Richard Branson are dyslexic. I really believe it gives you superpowers.
That's awesome.
In fact, they call the thinking of dyslexics, they call it big picture thinking, like an ability to kind of see like orders of magnitude more variables at the same time and almost just have clarity about what's going to happen.
Just think about that belief, everybody. When you take what everybody else tries to make a limitation and you see it as your superpower and you find its benefit, that's how your life changes. It shifts your identity. Once your identity shifts, your whole world shifts.
Yeah.
So you go to school, and what was your intention? What did you think you were going to do? Were you entrepreneurial? Or?
So no, initially I started at Berkeley as an engineering major, switched out of that to economics and business. And I kind of did a traditional route. I did management consulting in my first years out of college. And it wasn't really on my radar to start a company at that point. It was only when I was doing my MBA, I went back to Berkeley to do my MBA, still not realizing that I wanted to start a company. And it was actually in the first week of my MBA program, I was in the computer lab, and next to me was a a guy that was 1 year ahead of me in the second year of his MBA. And I said, oh, what did you do before the MBA program here at Berkeley? And he said, oh, I was an Air Force pilot. And I thought, Air Force pilot, wow. And then he said, I said, well, what are you doing now? He said, well, I'm starting a company. It actually ended up going public, that company, a real estate company called Zip Realty. And
was it on the web?
it was an early web, yeah, because this is in 2000. This is 1998, so early internet days, yeah. So yeah, he said, I'm starting a real estate internet company, and I thought, wow, an Air Force pilot is suddenly starting a company, and I thought, now I have no excuse because I mean, that's about as far as you can get, in terms of skill set, right?
That's right.
I mean, I'm sure he's great at flying planes,
Yes.
And so it was very inspiring for me. And I kind of thought, wow, you can really just define your own path, and you can, if you just want to do it, you just do it.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'm going to start a company as well.
And did you have any idea what kind of company you wanted to start? Or did you start something before Shazam?
No, I did not. So
Wow, it was your first enterprise.
It was my first company ever, yes.
Wow.
Up until then, I had just been a cookie cutter management consultant, just traditional, check in for a job and work hard, long hours. But yeah, it never occurred to me to really start a company. And
what was the aha moment where you got the idea for Shazam then?
So basically we went through, so I first chose co-founders before we actually knew what business we were going to start.
Oh, you knew before the company?
Yeah, so we thought, okay, well, let's start a company together.
And these were friends of yours or people you went out and got directly?
No, they're actually friends, 2 friends.
Okay.
The fourth one was not a friend. We had to hunt him down.
Yeah, the engineer.
Yeah, exactly, the inventor. But these 2, one of them was a classmate in business school, and one of them was just a friend from around the city, both talented guys.
And you're living, just to give everybody context, in the UK at the time.
And so we were living, well, I was doing my MBA at Berkeley, but then I was doing, then I went out and did a semester at London Business School. And so I was in London, yeah, correct. And so and it was during that period when I was in London doing an internship and so on at Microsoft, that we were in this mode of, say, we're going to start a company. We have no idea what, but something. And we would literally meet at cafes in London and just brainstorm. We would just throw out ideas, write them down on paper.
What was some of the early companies you considered?
There was the one that I thought about doing that quite seriously for a bit was contact lenses, selling contact lenses and all eye-related care on the web.
Yes.
And again, this is 1998.
Yeah.
So actually, had we done that, it could have been very successful. I think 1-800-Contacts became a huge business.
Yeah, of course it did.
I just found that I couldn't get that excited about it. I kind of thought, can I wake up every morning going, need to sell contacts on the web? And as you know, you need to put in a lot of passion and energy to start a company. So the breakthrough idea actually with Shazam was not, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could identify a song with a mobile phone? That was not the breakthrough idea, because actually there were about 6 companies doing that. But that no one's
doing what?
They were all embarked on trying to identify songs with a mobile phone.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but
even though there were no real smartphones at that point, right?
Right. This is early days. So one was Sony Corporation, and they had a little startup called eMarker. It was actually a device. That was not a phone. It was a little device you clicked. And then there was one called I can't remember the names of these kind of companies now.
That's okay.
Music. But anyway, so basically, what they were all doing is doing the traditional thing that one would do when you start a business, which is just, okay, here's a business I want to start. How do I go about it? And so the logical thing, working with existing technologies and building something, was to monitor radio play. And so that's what they were all doing. They were monitoring the radio stations. And then with these services, you'd say, I'm listening to this radio station, 105.3.
Right.
And then you'd enter that on your phone. And then they would tell you, okay, here's a song that's playing at this moment on the radio. Because that was technically feasible. We know what songs are playing on the radio. Yeah. It's not a hard problem to figure that out.
Yeah.
So the breakthrough at Shazam was that I was thinking about that business because it was early days and no one had really taken off yet. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to come up with something like that? But I was taking a class at London Business School called Strategic Innovation, taught by Kostas Markides. And it was really encouraging you to think outside the box about everything, question everything.
Yes.
And I was thinking about, if I created a business where I would track what's going on in all these radio stations and it would be similar to these other startups, what could someone do that would leapfrog me, that would just leave me behind in the dust?
Yes.
That's the strategic innovation.
So you thought in terms of your competitor if you were in that business.
Exactly. What would just, I invest all these years building this business, what would just leave me in the dust and just make me irrelevant? And then that was the breakthrough, because then I thought, what if you could just identify the song like from the air, not from the radio station? It's literally in the air, and then you wouldn't have to enter the radio station. And not only that, but it wouldn't just work for radio play. You'd use it in cafes, bars, clubs, movie theaters, everywhere you go, right? Shopping malls, anywhere you hear a song, because it's not just radio out there.
Yeah. That's wild. One of the things I try to teach all entrepreneurs is there's always two businesses you're running: the business you're in and the business you're becoming. And in order to be the business you're becoming, you've got to think about what would knock you off. I mean, you actually use that principle on your own. That's pretty awesome. Tell me, so you come up with the idea, you've got some initial partners, you start, as I understand it, to try to ask people, and they all say it's impossible, which lights your fire, which I love. So tell us more about those early days when it's impossible, and then tell us how you got to your fourth partner, your engineer. Is it even?
Avery. Yeah. So we have this idea, and again, we're non-technical guys, the three of us, and so we're like, oh yeah, we'll just invent this technology. You hold your phone up, and it's pattern recognition, and it will hear the sound over the phone. And these are ancient phones, right? This is in 2000. And it will identify the song. Great. Okay, so now how do we go about doing this? Go onto Google, type in a few things, a few queries, and we start to realize, okay, the people that are really advanced in this audio area, sort of pattern recognition, are basically, they're people who have focused on electrical engineering with a focus on digital signal processing, with a focus on audio signal processing.
Yes.
And then among those people focused on audio signal processing, some people had a particular interest in music.
Okay.
And we find these people on the web. They've published papers, done various studies, and they typically had come out of places like MIT Media Lab, or Stanford had a group called the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. And maybe in this program, 2 or 3 PhDs would graduate each year, and with a music PhD, music acoustics PhD. So we go out and we meet these guys, a few of them that we find, just reach out to them, and we're like, we have a top secret idea. You can't tell anyone, but we need to invent this technology that can identify songs on a mobile phone, okay? And they said, I'm sorry, that's just not possible. I know every technology out there. I don't know of any way to do something like that. And the reason is because you're dealing with, in pattern recognition, when you combine 2 core challenges, and one is scale, a lot of music, and then the other one is noise.
Yeah, because you're in a bar, you got people talking and still and recognize a song at any point in the song too, right?
Any point in the song, and there could be all kinds of audio challenges and so on. The phones have vocoders that emphasize the human voice and de-emphasize all other sounds, noise cancellation, just all these technologies working against you. And it was just incredible. We would capture some of these sound samples, and you could barely hear the music. And so they just had no idea how to do it. We finally found this professor who was kind of famous in this little circle of audio signal processing people, Professor Julius Smith at Stanford. He was famous because he had invented the algorithms behind the Yamaha synthesizers that are out there today, and all Yamaha or all electronic keyboards.
Yeah.
And so we went to him, and he said, I have no idea how to do this either. But he said, I think it's a great idea, and I'd be happy to be your advisor and help out.
Wow.
And so his first project as advisor was, I brought him a list of names, and I said, I found all these names, and they're pretty much, they're all PhDs, mostly out of MIT and Stanford and Berkeley and so on. And I said, we need a co-founder, and we need him to be like a genius. And so he knew all the names, because it's a small world. They go to the same conferences. And I just said, can you just rank the 5 smartest guys on this list, and just guys and gals, and we're going to go after those people as our co-founder. And I want them to be people that, because clearly they're all very smart, right? They're all PhDs from MIT and so on. But anyway, we said we need them to be like an inventor, actually an abstract thinker.
Yeah.
And someone that was just going to go down to the core principles and really think about how can we invent this type of technology. And so on that list, we had a little list of the top 5, and number 1 was this guy, Avery Wang, that had done his PhD under Julius. He had 4 or 5 degrees from Stanford in mathematics and electrical engineering. 4 or 5 degrees?
How old was he?
Well, yeah, I think he's probably still 15 years old now. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, I don't know. He's one of those math geniuses. I think now I don't know how old he is today, but he was a young guy.
Wow.
But just a genius. And so we went to meet him. Actually, he told us later, the only reason he took the meeting with us is because we were referred by this professor.
Right.
But he went out and met us in a little cafe over a burger in Silicon Valley. and we pitched our little deck to him and said, we need you to invent this technology. And he decided it was perfect timing because his own startup was failing. He needed something to do, and he said, why not?
He didn't think it was impossible.
No, that is a problem. Yeah, he actually did think it was impossible.
He still thought it was impossible, but I'll give it a shot.
yeah, he thought I'd give it a shot. And one problem I faced is that he kept facing kind of that brick wall feeling, like I don't think I can do it. You know, he was unsure whether it would be possible, basically, and I think he just didn't know if he could keep going because he was trying for months, working with Julius to invent this. And actually, Julius was such a positive, we can do anything kind of guy.
That's awesome.
That I would organize a barbecue, and then to keep my co-founder motivated, I would say, Julius, I think this is the professor he did his PhD under. Come over here, Julius. Don't you think this should be possible? It's got to be possible, right? And Julius would be like, yes, it does. And I thought it had to be possible. And so Avery would just feel the pressure because he's like, okay, they all have these expectations. I better invent something.
Well, first of all, in order to do this at that time, there's no Spotify, there's no iTunes. So how did you build the database? Forget even the technology, the noise cancellation, and all the other problems you would have.
Yeah.
How did you come up with a database that could be recognized?
Yeah, so because this is early days, right?
Yeah, right. So what year would this be?
So this is basically when we raised our angel round. That was the summer of 2000.
Okay.
And then our venture round a year later. $7.5
million. And iTunes came in what, 2004?
iTunes was about 2003 or 4 around there.
Yeah, and then the iPhone's 2007.
And the App Store 2008.
So you're like 7 years before the phone, 3 or 4 years before iTunes.
Yeah.
And there's no database. In those days, you're buying stuff on CDs, and ripping it? What did you do?
Yeah.
Like a song, if you went to a music store back then, I know because I was looking at the stats, they had about 200,000 songs.
Yeah.
In total.
Yeah.
That's a lot of songs.
Yeah.
So how did you get 200,000 songs into a database?
So we were, we also had a limited amount of capital. So
how much did you raise, first of all?
So we had $7.5 million, which is quite a lot of money.
That's a tough raise.
But to do what we were trying to do, you needed a lot of money, especially when you're starting from scratch, because we had to build our own search engine as well from scratch.
Did you go to VCs for that money?
We went to VCs, yeah.
And how many did you have to go to before somebody said yes?
It was about over 100 VCs. Yeah.
You give me a fist bump on that, brother. Ladies and gentlemen, over 100 VCs tell him no. Oh my God. Every great entrepreneur I've ever met, virtually, and I'm sure there's some exception, who has made it, has always gone through 100, 200, 500, 1,000 no's, literally, to get to that point. That is the dividing line from reality of turn your dreams into reality or not. And I think I read somewhere, one of the VCs said to you something about no one would ever want to use this or something.
Yeah.
What did they say?
One of my favorite highlights. It was I won't name the VC, but it was a big VC. But yeah, we showed him the demo, and at that point we had an actual demo, and identified a song, and a text message came to the phone, and he said, "I don't see why anyone would ever use that." And I was like, that just motivated me so much. And I just thought, by the way, I like to say, have you ever heard the golden rule? The golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. Yes. So the VCs make the rules.
That's right.
And it's when you're an entrepreneur.
So you went through more than 100 VCs. You got guys telling it's going to be worthless. You kept going. You get $7.5 million, which is not a lot of money for the level of tech you have to do at this stage. So tell us, how did you even build the database?
Yeah. So basically what we ended up doing is we first built software from scratch that would run on PCs, and it would basically rip CDs, take the fingerprints of the music. We use fingerprints from music, so it's mathematical descriptions of the sound.
Okay.
And then we built that software. Then we hired about 25, 30, 18-year-olds to work 3 shifts, 3 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day, putting CDs into these computers, running our custom software. And then basically typing the name of every song and the album title and the artist, because that stuff is not
all by hand.
All by hand, 24 hours a day, so we could launch in less than 9 months.
Holy cow. And how many songs did you launch with?
And we launched with 1.7 million songs.
Oh, so it'd be bigger than any music store.
Yeah. Yeah, it was probably a good 6 or 7 times that of the largest record stores at the time.
Yeah, because even those days you went to Virgin or HMV or places like that in London, here, Licorice Pizza, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Tower Records.
Yeah.
So literally this is all done by hand. So then tell us the first version. How long did it take to get that first version? And if I read right, I think you were on Nokia with those little gray screens, and
Yeah.
you could barely even text back then, right?
Yeah. You could. I mean, all people did with phones was make phone calls and send text messages. The one innovative thing you could do on a mobile phone was download a ringtone. We all remember that, and be like, oh, and it was a monophonic ringtone. And so we were like one of the first services that you could be other than making phone calls or sending text messages.
And did you think it was going to just explode? And what actually happened?
Yeah, so I was convinced, because you'd show it to people and they'd say, wow, I mean, it's like magic. They couldn't believe you'd hold this phone up in the air, this very rude, basic phone, and then after a few seconds, a text message would appear at this phone and it would say the name of the song. You'd show this to people and they'd be like, wow, that is incredible. And except for that one VC, of course. And so we thought, once we launch this thing, it's just going to take off like like a rocket or like wildfire. But the reality is that we had to have a business model at the time, and there was no advertising. There was that wasn't even a graphical user interface. So our model was much like calling 411, which was each time you used it, you paid a small fee, like 50 cents, 50 pence.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a problem, a bit of a hurdle to usage. But ultimately, we learned that just getting the word out is such a difficult thing, and it doesn't matter how great of an idea or great of a product you have. Sometimes just getting the word out is so much harder than you realize. I worked at Dropbox, and it was the same kind of thing. It's an amazing product, but getting the word out was just so difficult. So
plus, you were so far ahead of the time in terms of tech. Ray Kurzweil's a good friend of mine. He's one of the, I'm sure you know, one of the greatest inventors of our time. And his great skill is being able to tell you 10 years from now what can be done. He doesn't know which tech will do it, but he knows based on compounding where it's going to be. And you have this vision. How did you know that we were going to go to smartphones? How did you know this was going to occur? Like, what gave you that insight when people are still just using a phone to make phone calls?
I think it was just, I had myself, during business school, had bought my first mobile phone, regular mobile phone.
Like a flip phone in those days?
A flip phone, yeah.
Yeah,
I bought it on eBay. I forgot what kind of brand it was, but I don't think it was even Nokia. But anyway, I bought that, and I kind of thought, I could just feel how everyone was getting mobile phones. It was just happening. Do we remember that day when suddenly it went from being, a third of your friends had phones to suddenly like everyone had phones, all very rapidly in just a year or two. And I just thought, all these people are going to be walking around with phones. They need something to do. There's got to be something they can do with these phones. And that was definitely a contributor towards the Shazam concept, was like, we're going to do something that everyone can do with a phone, not just your computer, but something that's going with you everywhere you go.
So when you got a Nokia, you do this first exposure. It's hard to get the word out. You thought it would take off. It obviously didn't at the level you'd hoped. Were you able to make money at that yet?
We were struggling. We were really struggling. We had a marketing budget. That was part of the $7.5 million. And we made web banner ads, radio ads. We even hired people to walk into bars and just tell people about Shazam.
Yeah.
So we were doing everything you can. Our first market was the UK. And when we launched, we were usable by anyone with a mobile phone. So because it was just all you needed, a phone that could make a phone call and get a text message, which was all phones.
Right.
So you didn't need some kind of advanced phone to use Shazam. But we learned that just the amount you spend on marketing to drive awareness to someone was just more than the little bit of money that we made every time someone Shazammed. And so we struggled. We barely survived. We actually had 2 rounds of layoffs. We probably were near bankruptcy for the entire 6-year period between launching in 2002 and the App Store coming out in 2008.
And I read somewhere, I think in 2003 or 4, like 2 or 3 of your partners left the company.
Yeah.
And then I know did you simultaneously, I read that you went to work at Google, you were interested in innovation, and also you just mentioned, what do you call it, Dropbox.
Dropbox, yeah.
Was that happening simultaneously? So you were trying to manage both these things?
So basically, my full-time role, I moved over to Google, and that was 2004 when it was an interesting 2,000-person company, and it's
right before it went public, right?
Right, a few months before it went public, yeah. And then my main role on Shazam was a board member. I was the hardest working board member because I was working 20 hours a week on top of my Google job, and for many, many years, just doing everything I can to try to make this baby a success.
And then you went to Dropbox. Tell me, what are the lessons, if I may ask, what stood out to you from your experience at Google? Did any of that help you later as an entrepreneur in innovation? And then same thing with Dropbox. What did you learn there?
Yeah, I learned so much at both places. I mean, just the way those two businesses went around about building, taking a core disruptive technology and then making it so addressable to such large numbers of users in a scalable way, and really being at the forefront of technology adoption and technology development. It was just fascinating. I mean, I was lucky enough when I joined Google, my job was I was a business development guy, a partnerships guy. I'm non-technical.
Wow.
So my job was mobile partnerships. I was actually the first mobile partnerships guy at Google. And so I had to do the relationships with AT&T and Verizon, but also European companies like Vodafone and Nokia in Finland and so on. But just being in that environment, I learned so much about how you think as a business long term.
Yeah.
From the founders, the way that the founders at Google would approach everything like it was a clean slate. They would say, right down to how do we hire people? What do we say in the interviews? How do we motivate people? How do we choose who to promote? Everything. They would just basically throw out all the standard stuff and then start from scratch. And
Everything is innovation, even down to how to recruit people.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. And what about Dropbox?
Dropbox is also amazing. I just think that company is just so amazing as an example of how Drew and Arash thought about the problem.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, basically, they were also like Shazam. There were many music recognition attempts before. There were multiple attempts at cloud-type services before Dropbox, and none of them took off because they were clunky experiences where you had to download a piece of software, and then every time you wanted to upload a file, you would click upload, and every time you wanted the file back, you would click download.
Yeah.
And so they kind of said, okay, we're not going to even think about the cloud problem. We're going to give that to Amazon. Let Amazon do all the cloud stuff. We're going to focus on the front-end experience and just make it seamless. And so, the way they did that is basically by conquering synchronization. And synchronization is one thing they conquered, and the second thing is integration with a file and folder system, so that you can really look like your own folder. And they did that so well that basically now you just had a folder on your computer. If you put a file in there, it was in Dropbox. It was in the cloud. No upload or no download. And one early Dropboxer once said to me, he said, "Chris, we had 0 steps, and all our predecessors had 1 step. Click upload or click download, right?" And he said, "And Chris, the difference between 0 and 1 is infinite."
Wow. Well, I always talk about to our team that complexity is the enemy of execution. Right? You make it too complex. You've took something unbelievably complex but made it so simple for the user. I mean, that seems to be the secret at Dropbox, certainly for Google, certainly what you did as well. I'm curious, how did you keep the business funded when you're having to do layoffs and things and keep it going and there's no real distribution channel? How did you do it? Did you go to more money, more VCs?
No, that would have never worked, as you said.
I was going to say, I don't imagine them giving you any money at that stage.
Yeah, and you would dilute to the point of non-existence. But luckily what we did, and this is something that I encourage so many entrepreneurs to think about, is that we found an easier way. I always like to say revenue is like oxygen. You need oxygen to survive. You need to keep breathing. You need revenue to survive as a startup, to bring something in, to pay the bills. You can't just keep relying on funding. And sometimes the revenue can come, the easier way to get revenue is to go after something that might be a parallel to your core business.
Okay.
And so for Shazam, we built a service to just monitor radio stations, because it turns out, isn't that interesting? Because we found out that we had an amazing, highly efficient technology, and there were companies that wanted to know what was playing on the radio. In fact,
kind of monitor their competition. Is that?
Well, actually, no. So AskCap and BMI pay out over $1 billion.
So they get paid.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, even smarter. Wow.
And they pay out $1 billion a year to artists for all their royalties.
Yep.
And up until back then, they were estimating what's played on the radio. They had people just listening to radio stations, writing it down, and then listening to 1% of radio play, and then projecting that up to 100%. It was very, very archaic.
Wow.
So they ended up licensing our technology, and that brought in millions of dollars in revenue.
Did it make you profitable at that stage, or just keep the doors open?
It didn't make us profitable, but it brought money in. And then actually what we ended up doing is selling that business for a big chunk of money.
Wow.
And that money that came in then funded the company for several years.
Wow. The name Shazam, where does it come from? And I heard that a lot of people want to talk you out of it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so basically, when I came up with the idea for Shazam, I thought, it's going to be, people are going to hold their phone up in the air, and then they're going to know the name of the song. And that just felt like magic. It really felt like magic.
It is still, I think.
Yeah, and it's like, wow, how can that be? And so Shazam actually has been, it's a comic series, it's been used, it's actually originally, I think, Arabic folklore it comes from, and it actually means to conjure magic.
Wow.
And so in the old Billy Batson comic series, this little boy would say, Shazam, and a lightning bolt would strike down from the sky, and he would become a superhero.
Yes.
And it's been used in other contexts similar.
Well, matched your whole identity as a superhero.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
awesome. But people try to talk you out of it, I heard.
Well, so one of my co-founders, this is one of the things you learn for everyone here who has co-founders. You're not always going to agree on everything in life and everything in your business, and that's going to be one of the struggles. And so one of my co-founders, he's an amazing guy. I always like to say he has the productivity of 10 superhumans.
Wow.
But he just said, that name is terrible. He's like, that's a terrible name. We've got to get rid of that, And it wasn't just him, by the way. I had VCs as well. We'd pitch to them, and they have the gold, and they would say, oh, but you got to change that name. Can't you call it something like Identify Song or something like that?
Yeah, something really emotional, something that moves you, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! But how did you just persisted and then?
Yeah, and I was very nervous because at one point after raising the venture money, we hired this big marketing guy who had run all of marketing for Capital Radio Group, which is the largest radio group in the UK. And he said, okay, now we're going to hire an agency and we're going to evaluate what name to use for launch. And I kind of thought, oh no, don't give up on Shazam. I just felt so just emotionally attached to it.
Yeah.
And luckily, he concluded, oh, you guys have made enough traction with this name so far, even before launching.
Oh, okay,
with
got it.
partners, we're going to stick with it. And I was like, oh, thank you.
Continuity saved you.
Yeah.
Tell me, when did you know it was going to work? When was the breakthrough? Was it iTunes? When did the breakthrough happen for you? And then how did you get tied up with Apple?
Yeah, so the day the App Store launched was definitely the day, and from that day forward.
And you were on it from the very first day.
Yes, from day one, Shazam was an app. In fact, Apple wanted to showcase amazing things that would show off their new phone. Remember, the iPhone had been out a year. So
Right.
during that year, they were reached out to various companies, a small set of companies, some of them gaming companies, for example. And they kind of thought, okay, what are some great showcase apps that we can co-develop, actually, even they provided guidance on what it could look like and so on. And so Shazam was right out the gate at the opening of the App Store. There was Shazam, and they immediately had this concept of ranking apps based on popularity.
Right.
And Shazam, and then the App Store just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew with more and more apps and more people and more phones. And there Shazam just stayed there in that top 20 or even top 100. It varied by country and time, but it just always remained one of the most popular apps. And so I remember in those first few years, the App Store, Apple would produce reports, and they'd publicly release and say, here are the top most downloaded apps. And you'd see like Google Maps
Right.
and Skype and so on.
Facebook.
And Facebook. And then there was Shazam. And I have to admit, I did reach out to that venture capitalist, by the way. And I said, it turns out people will use this.
That's awesome. I love that. How did he respond to that? Did he laugh?
He did. Actually, at that time, I was working at Google, and he came out, he said, let's have lunch, and we had lunch, and we just laughed about how it's just, you can't predict the future, right?
Yeah.
You can't predict the future. And it was great. It was great.
Now, was it a free app originally?
It was a free app, but we initially had a model where you could only use it 5 times a month. And if you wanted to use it more, then you had paid for a premium version of Shazam.
Oh, I see.
So that was one of our many iterations of business models. I mean, Shazam must have gone through. Shazam innovated more on business models than it did on technology, almost.
And so did you? How soon before you knew the app was taking off? How soon before that converted into monetization then for you, since people were doing it for free initially and so forth?
Yeah. Well, so. It's complicated. We always had revenue streams. It's just that they would change over time. I mean, initially it was pay-per-use on text.
Okay.
Then there were licensing models, which I skipped over, by the way.
Okay.
During the survival years, the 6 survival years, where we had B2B businesses and licenses, we also licensed Shazam. So there were like versions of Shazam that we preloaded on Motorola phones and Samsung phones.
Okay,
and
got it.
So that was a licensing model pay per phone. Then the app launched in the App Store, and then we had this sort of certain percentage of paid users that we had. And then actually, people were starting to download a lot of iTunes music. We actually became, I think, the #1 affiliate of iTunes downloads. $300 million a year of music downloaded on Apple iTunes.
That's good, man. But that's incredible. That's amazing. So what point did Apple approach you, or did you approach Apple to say buy the business? And did you have any sense that you were going to be able to sell it for $400 million?
So, yes. I mean, I think that was I would say that was within our target based on the venture capital round.
How much had you raised at that point to keep the company going?
We had raised actually close to 140 million. Yeah.
Oh,
so when you raise that much,
you
need to make sure you sell for a big price tag to keep everyone happy.
Yeah. And did Apple approach you? Did you approach them? How did it come about?
The best, they say many of the best acquisitions are that come out of close relationships.
That's
right. And there's no doubt that Shazam had a close relationship already. I mean, for years, when Apple would release new versions of its OS for iPhone and so on, they would make sure that Shazam already was up to speed right for the release of the new OS. We worked very closely with them on optimizing the experience, the flow-through experience to the iTunes download, because we were such a big affiliate driver for them. So there were many things we were doing with Apple already, and we had a very close partner relationship. Oh, also, by the way, we powered Siri. So when you use Siri to identify a song, that was Shazam, and that was a commercial relationship between Shazam and Apple.
What year did that start happening? Because I only started using that like a year ago myself.
No, that was a few years ago. That was before Apple bought Shazam. So Apple bought Shazam in 2018. I'm going to say it could have been anywhere around 2015.
Another example of the technology's there, but a lot of people didn't know to use it. They use Shazam, but not to use Siri in that way.
Yeah.
So you're already integrated to a great extent. You're already there. How'd the price come about?
So we worked with a top-tier investment bank for the road show of the M&A process, Goldman Sachs, who did an amazing job. And they're just incredible. They just opened the door to all the big decision makers at all the big companies. So as you might imagine, we went through a process where we were having confidential conversations with a lot of the largest technology companies that would be good fits with Shazam.
Right.
And I think ultimately the fit between Apple and Shazam was the strongest. I mean, Apple cares deeply about music. They've always been the lead.
Part of their DNA.
It's part of their DNA. And iTunes, I think at one point, iTunes represented 80 or 90% of all digital music in the world.
Yeah.
And obviously they had Spotify as a real competitor now in streaming music, but Apple Music is definitely up there as the other leading service.
Yes.
And so it was just an excellent fit between. And then the other aspect that was an excellent fit is that fortunately Shazam had always been obsessed with simple, beautiful experiences that people loved, and we had very high ratings in the App Store. People love Shazam, and that fit very well with the user experience focus of Apple as well.
1 billion downloads? Is that what I read? Is that accurate?
That was announced years ago, so it would be like north of that by now. Yeah, it's exciting.
What an exciting field! Tell me, what did you experience when you sold the company? Was there excitement? Obviously, was there any sense of loss because you built it? Was it a dream fulfilled? And did it change your life in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it was such a wonderful outcome as an entrepreneur because it is your baby, and I was
especially when everybody told you it was impossible.
Yes, I know. So it was so satisfying to see, okay, this is now out there and people use it, and the awareness is incredible. And I was telling Dan and Angie, I remember going into like a grocery store, and then suddenly right in front of me in line, the person says, "What's that song?" And the person behind the counter is like, "Look, get out, Shazam!" And this whole interaction is going on right in front of me.
Cool.
And those kind of moments are just so satisfying to see that in the wild. And then ultimately when you care so deeply about this baby that you're so obsessed with, and then it ends up where it ends up matters. And the fact that it ended up with Apple made me so happy. Yeah. Apple they actually made Shazam. The first thing they did is remove all the advertising. We needed advertising. Yes. That was the last of the business models that we got to. And it ended up becoming our primary revenue stream because we had to survive. But Apple didn't need the advertising revenue. So they just removed that, and then the app became even cleaner and faster and more beautiful. And it just fits so well with Apple, the company. So I was delighted from day one that that's where it ended up. Cool. And then finally I could stop obsessing with Shazam. I don't call Apple and say, now you need to change this, you need to change that.
Yeah, they keep continuously improving anything. And what about the economics of it? Did it change your life radically? And what are you doing today? Like, I have so many entrepreneurs. I was fortunate to sell a company to Apple as well, not for as much as yours, but a VR company. And they're really doing some nice things to it. So I know that sense of satisfaction. But on the economic side, some people's lives are really changed by it. Some people aren't much. I know a lot of entrepreneurs, they got to start the next thing. I know some entrepreneurs is like, no, I'm just going to go enjoy my life for a while.
Yeah.
What's your life like right now, and what are you doing with your life? What's fulfilling for you?
Yeah. So I would say I'm a little bit of a hybrid of those two.
What I just described.
But yeah, definitely. So it was nice to have a financial outcome, and it was a good one. It was not. Yeah, it was a good outcome, definitely.
A great one.
Yeah, and so that gives you the financial freedom to choose what you want to do. I love to be able to spend a lot of time with my son, who
He's here. I saw him.
Yeah.
13.
And like me, he is dyslexia. He got all my bad genes: dyslexia, ADHD.
Well, maybe they're your good genes,
maybe,
your superhero genes.
Right, exactly. So
I'm going to want to see what he's going to create.
he's like, Daddy, I got the cleft chin from you. Oh, he calls it the butt chin. He's like, oh.
Tell him that's a Superman chin. That's
So
awesome.
So I just try to teach him. I try to give him the learnings, and it's really working. These are your superpowers, and if you can get, just like Richard Branson and Charles Schwab, you can get bad grades in high school and still be a superstar, and maybe one day you'll be an entrepreneur. So I love putting a lot of time into that, spending time with my son.
That's beautiful.
I am incubating a startup because I wanted to start a new company, but I wanted this one to not be nearly as high pressure, but still be meaningful impact. So this is impact-driven startup.
Is it impossible?
Well, it's going to be very challenging because I definitely love the technically challenging aspect.
I figured that.
So it is computer vision, artificial intelligence.
Oh, AI. Okay, great.
Yeah, and it's and basically my goal is to see if I can prevent drowning in swimming pools using cameras and computer vision.
Wow.
So yeah, so that's the idea. So the best way to think of it is think of it like a smoke alarm, except it sits in a swimming pool. And the way you compare it to a smoke alarm is that you don't ever think about your smoke alarm. You don't come home and turn it on.
Yeah.
Say, is the smoke alarm on? It's just always on, always there in case a fire starts. And sadly, drownings are something that occur every year in swimming pools. It's actually I think it's the number one cause of accidental deaths for children under the age of 5 in the United States, even exceeding car accidents, gunshots, poisonings.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing? And
That's insane.
yeah, so basically this startup is called Guard, and the goal is to think in a similar kind of way of how can we think in a disruptive technology way, but also create a very simple experience. And that's key, very simple.
Same thing again, yeah.
Yeah, so that it's easy for people. You don't have to
Complex in the background, but simple for the person.
but simple for the user. And just suddenly, if God forbid, someone starts drowning, and it could be adults as well. I mean, one of famous adults, one of William Shatner's wives drowned. One of Michael Jackson's, I think, cousins drowned or something.
Yeah.
If that were to happen, this would recognize the event by using computer vision, much like a self-driving car recognizes someone crossing the street.
Right.
And just very, very sophisticated recognition of visual events.
And it makes an alarm. Is that what occurs?
And it set off alarms all over the house and yard. And then because it turns out that in most drownings, there's actually someone home. It's just that it's silent. A drowning is a silent event. In the movies, people say, help, help.
Yeah.
But in reality, underwater.
Be interesting if this is my crazy thought. It's completely wrong, but it'd be interesting if there was something in case someone's not there that's released into the water that they could hold on to.
That would be the next step. Yeah.
That would be an interesting piece, so that they could save themselves in the moment. That
Yeah.
type of thing. That's very cool. I love your drive is always to do something that lifts lives. Your product gives so much joy to people. What gives you the most joy?
Gosh, I love being in the outdoors, and I love hanging out with my friends, the people that I love, my family and friends. That you just realize that the basics in life, the things that are free, are the best things.
That's true.
And they really, I just have so much gratitude for my family and my friends, and just the ability to spend time with them.
That's beautiful. Well, we're going to go for 3 quick questions. Becky Blake, Team 7, give it up for her, ladies and gentlemen. Becky, where are you in the world? Where are you in the world?
I'm in San Francisco.
San Francisco, everybody, give it up for her. What's your question, Chris?
So I'm just now getting started in my app in creating AI, and you're doing what I want to be doing. What are 3 things I need to focus on to actually do what you're doing?
I think ultimately the most important thing is to focus on the end user, and to make sure you're really keeping yourself in check with what is the end user experience. What are people how are they gonna experience your app, and how much benefit you're going to bring to them. It has to be, I mean, there's a saying that many people have read that, is it a vitamin or is it a painkiller? Have you ever heard that before? And so if it's a vitamin, it's a little bit better, but if it's a painkiller, we all jump for that ibuprofen or Tylenol once in a while, and you're really happy you had it. And so you really want to think about, is what I'm offering a painkiller? Is it really just solving the problem and making it 100 times better? And I find that many entrepreneurs, they get so obsessed with their own vision that they sometimes lose sight of what other people think. So I think that having the humility to always keep yourself in check and constantly ask people, what's not good enough about this? How could this be improved? Tell me what's bad about it.
Yes.
That would be my
great feedback. And by the way, I know Becky, she really is phenomenal, and she works with people individually. She's now trying to convert it to an app. She's done miraculous work. Great to see you, Becky. Thank you so much. Give her a hand to everybody. 2 more. Miles Grant. He can. Where are you in the world, Miles?
I am in Birmingham in the UK, brother.
Give it up for the UK, ladies and gentlemen.
My question is, what is going on in your mind when you are thinking of this incredible, my jaw dropped. When you told me this new startup, the swimming pools, my jaw dropped to the floor. I was like, what is going on in your mind? What's the step behind that allows you to come up with the thinking to get to that stage where you come up with that idea? Because it's just phenomenal. My jaw dropped.
You mean because nobody else had done it? There was no way to distribute it?
Yeah. It's like, yeah, exactly.
So, by the way, my father did his university degree and PhD in Birmingham University. So you're in his.
Wow.
He's British.
Amazing.
So, I find that the ideation process is it's more of an art than a science. But I do think that we all can sit here and come up with ideas, right? You can brainstorm ideas, and sometimes you just stumble across ideas. Sometimes it's a combination of things where you experience something. Like in my case, my son was growing up as a toddler with his mom, and there was a pool there, and I thought, oh my gosh, like that pool, you can think of it like a fire pit. That's a real risk, and so it made me very aware of the real something that needs to be solved, because I realize as a parent, it's hard. You can build fences and try to keep an eye on them all the time, but you don't know if you can have a foolproof solution. So that was inspiration. But there were also aspects where I thought, I believe as an entrepreneur, sometimes when you conquer a problem that's really hard, you're giving yourself an advantage because many other entrepreneurs or even large companies are not going to do a very good job of that. And you have the advantage of doing it as well as you possibly can. And I kind of thought, part of solving this problem is that you're working with the infrastructure of an existing pool. There's a pool in the ground with concrete all around it and pool equipment off to the side. How are you going to work within that environment and introduce this new thing that needs consistent power and so on, and how are you going to implement it and create a user experience that doesn't involve jackhammering concrete all around the pool and spending $100,000 to install something? So I liked those challenges, the hardware aspects of this idea. So I guess in a nutshell, what I would say is that as you kind of navigate through different ideas, I think you almost, what I like to do is to think about these kind of certain aspects of it. So what's doable, what hasn't been done, and what can I do much better? What could use brand new approaches and my unique thinking? I often think that the secret weapon that we all have as business people is judgment, right? Because we all have resumes and experience and contacts and things like that, but those are kind of controlled and measured by other people. But your own judgment, you have 100% control of that. That's just all you. And your judgment is that secret thing that ultimately leads to that success outcome years later, and people later go, oh, wow, he was right. He had this non-consensus insight that we just didn't see. And if you look at so many successful startups, whether it's Airbnb or Google or Skype or anything, there's a non-consensus insight they had. It was ultimately their very good judgment and knowing what the right thing to do is. So as you go through that ideation process, it's applying your judgment to think about what are the good ideas, what are the ones that really have legs, and almost like playing out in your mind, whether this is going to be that has the potential to be a successful business. And that applied for this drowning thing. I felt like this is something that needs to exist. It needs to be affordable. It needs to be something that people can put in existing pools and people can feel safe. And we need to be able to save lives, even if a parent is just, their attention is distracted and they're running to get lemonade for a few minutes. We need to be able to save lives in those situations.
What's your timeline on this? I'm curious.
Sorry?
What's your timeline on this product? Do you have any sense?
This is going to be a multi-year project.
Yeah, it would have to be.
Oh yeah, it's going to. I mean, hardware alone, they say, is hard, and it takes a long time. Yeah. I'm not at the stage of actual hardware development. But yeah, it's going to be a long-term project to do it well.
And also, I would add, Miles, as he said earlier, it's also having enough passion behind your judgment, because without that passion, you don't have enough fuel to push through all those years when it's lean and nothing's working, is another one. Thank you for your question, Miles. Let's do one more. By the way, Tracy Evans, she's so fired up in her room there, the fire alarm went off. She's joining in her Jeep while the fire department does their thing. Nice job, Tracy Evans. She's not missing a word you're gonna say. Let's go with one more. Room 11, team 11 here with Barbara. Give it up for Barbara. Barbara, where are you in the world?
I'm in Vienna.
What's your question?
Chris, you showed the picture with all these CDs, and I thought that's such a huge task. So how did you start to go for it? Did you buy the CDs? Or what did you do? I think you always be in front of such a huge task and you don't get started.
So the 1.5 million or 1.7 million songs, in other words, did you go buy all these CDs she's saying?
Yeah.
Or how'd you do it?
Yeah, so this is actually, so I like to talk about this concept I call creative persistence. Okay?
Yes.
And so it's because all entrepreneurs will all have to be persistent.
Right.
But I think what's really important is this kind of this bringing them together, creative persistence, where you're being persistent, but you're also really thinking outside the box and thinking of unique ways to solve a problem. I saw this go on a lot at Google and Dropbox when they solved so many different things. Like when they ingested all the books in the world for Google book search, they invented a thing that just turns pages of books so they could scan them all in a scalable way. But so in the case of the CDs, we thought, oh, we're this startup and we have a limited amount of funds and we need this much for marketing and this much for hiring and so on.
Right.
And so we thought, it turns out the number of CDs that we needed, this is the number of total CDs available in the UK market, is 100,000 CDs. So if we had bought that, let's call it at the time $10 a CD, right? That's $1 million. Yeah. And that's a lot when you're a startup and you only have a certain amount of funding. So the creative part of our persistence is that we went to the company that was the biggest distributor of CDs at the time. So it actually had about 4 or 5 times as many CDs as the biggest record stores, which had about 15,000 unique CDs in stock at a time. This company had 100,000 CDs. And we said, wouldn't you love to have a digital copy of all those CDs? Because the world is becoming digital, right? This is 2000.
Wow, smart.
And then, so we literally formed a partnership where we co-located at their warehouse outside of London, had our 25 to 30 18-year-olds located at their site, going into the warehouse, picking a CD from those racks, pulling it out, putting it in the computer, typing in the songs, and then returning it. And they didn't charge us a penny for that relationship.
Wow.
Because we shared the outcome with them.
What I love is that some people just persist asking for something, but you feel like a good way to add value. And when you add value with that kind of creativity, that's brilliant. I'm so glad you asked the question, Barbara. Give her a hand. Thank you very much.
Oh, Tony.
Oh, wait a second. Yes, hi.
My name is Hannah, and because we're talking about music and I have the chance to speak to you. Oh, I'm so nervous. I'm literally shivering. The thing is, I want to do the same as you do. I want to lead people to new perspectives and kind of lead them to their deep feelings and change their life.
Yes.
And for me, because music is so deep in me because of my dad and everything, that those icons and the interviews change my life, and I want to be that person. And it's the thing is, in America there are so many open-minded people, And we live in Austria, and like the German culture and Austrian culture is kind of conservative. And I'm just pissed because there aren't, I don't know, many artists that, I don't know, talk so open-minded about it, and I want to be that. And my question is, I still have some fear talking about it. And it's kind of such a big project. I need to develop the skills because I still think I need the singing skills, the songwriting and everything. And I don't know. I just wanted to share that with you.
Well, I can see that you have. I can see you have the passion. Definitely have the passion.
That's right.
And that's the most important aspect. Because remember, with the contact lens thing, if you wake up in the morning, you're like, I just can't see myself selling contact lenses on the web. That's hard. I can see that you have the passion to be a musician and to get involved in the musician industry. So that's the most important thing. Yeah, I would say go for it. You know, go for it. The key is to navigate your way into the music industry and find the people that are already there and already experts and network with them and ask them all the questions you can think of.
One of the most successful business people I ever met when I was very young was a multi-billionaire, and I asked him, you know, how he became a multi-billionaire, and he said to me, and I shared it earlier in this week, so I don't know if you heard it, but he said, proximity is power. You know, if you look at somebody like Bill Gates, you know, Bill Gates quit Harvard, and he didn't have any software for this company called Microsoft, or the original company he went to, Altera. And yet he told them, I'm going to go do this. But the real secret, besides being very bright and persistent, was he had direct relationships at IBM through his parents. They were on the board of directors. And as you connected with Apple and started to build a relationship, then you had proximity for someone to do it. So my advice to you is, number one, stop caring about how conservative or unconservative is. There's some of the greatest different radical types of music has come out of Germany and Austria in the past. Hard metal, crazy stuff. So while there is a conservative culture, there's a segment that is extremely creative that comes up with things no one else does in your culture. And so instead of finding the limitations, find the strengths, or decide what every great leader does, create your own culture. Right? That's what a leader does. You know, they don't adapt to the culture. I'm sure you've heard the old phrase that says, you know, reasonable people adapt to the culture, unreasonable people adapt the culture to themselves. That's why all breakthroughs come from unreasonable people. I'm paraphrasing, that's not the right language, but that's the essence of it. And so it's like you have to then find within yourself that I have so much passion, so much certainty, I'm gonna build that certainty. And instead of getting overwhelmed by all the things you gotta do, you're gonna say, let me just make sure every day I'm making progress. Every day I'm going to take a step forward, and I'm going to consistently get in proximity with brilliant people that are doing things in the direction of what I want to do. And if I have to work as a janitor, which is what I did in the beginning, day and night while I was still in school, to get around people, I would be a janitor at this place where I want to be around this executive. And quite honestly, I'd read all his memos and things in the middle of the night so I could think about how he thought, because I didn't have access like I have today. So get yourself in proximity with people who are making things happen, and if you do a great job at anything you do for them, when you work your guts out, you'll become appreciated. And as you're appreciated, you become part of their culture. As you come to that culture, you'll get new insights, and then opportunities will happen. And this person, by the way, told me at one point, he said, what do you want to accomplish? And I gave him some of my dreams and goals, and he said, well, those are big. He said, how many, private equity guys do you know? How many people, investment bankers do you know? And I said, no, I don't know, maybe a dozen. He goes, how many you spend time with? I said, none. He said, I want you to go and spend time with them. I said, but you have something to give. I always have to give something. It's just my way I'm wired, right? I don't know what I really want yet or how to do it, because it doesn't matter. They're going to want to be around you. Get around them. And I did this for months. And then suddenly one day, sure enough, he said, they're going to want to do a deal with you. And then somebody brought me this deal. And the deal at the time, made me about $40 million in 2 months when I had never made $4 million in a year working 20-hour days. And then that deal fell apart afterwards. They wanted me to change the deal. And I learned from him, when somebody wants to change the deal, don't get pissed, think about what you want. And I put that in a new deal where I made $400 million 2 years later. So proximity is power. Put yourself in proximity, keep your passion alive, keep making progress, and make sure you're trying to innovate or grow every day in some way. Face your fears every single day. You'll find it'll change your life. Give her a hand. Let's have a hand for Chris, first of all. Everybody, it's a big hand for Chris. I'm not sending you away. I want you to stay here, but I'm going to have you go 2 chairs over.
Thanks so much.
Let him hear you. It's Chris. No, let him hear you, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, yes.